12 months, one contract, and the night he called me a signed agreement. My name is Emma Harding. I'm 24 years old. And 12 months ago, I was standing at an altar in a borrowed white dress, about to marry a man who looked at me like I was a tax audit he couldn't write off. 3 days before that wedding, I had flour on my apron and my hands buried in bread dough. Now I was wearing silk and diamonds I hadn't chosen, about to become Mrs. Sebastian Blackwell. Here's how it happened. An old man named Thomas Blackwell, the patriarch of one of the wealthiest families in the city, died 6 months earlier. 6 months. And he left a will with a clause so strange that even the lawyers blinked. His only son, Sebastian, would inherit everything. The mansion. The business empire. The name. On one condition. He had to marry me. Emma Harding. The baker's daughter. Because 10 years ago, on a frozen winter night, my father and I found Thomas Blackwell collapsed in the snow outside our shop. His car had broken down. He was hours from dying in the cold. We brought him in. We warmed him by the fire. My father refused payment for the bread and soup. Thomas never forgot. And in his final act, he decided to teach his arrogant son a lesson. He bound him to the daughter of a humble baker. He forced Sebastian to marry someone he would have walked past on the street without a second glance. I tried to say no. I told the lawyer, Mr. Thompson, that I wanted no part of this world. But he explained that my refusal would cost Sebastian everything. His inheritance. His company. His future. And there was my father. Ailing. Needing expensive medical treatment I couldn't afford. The lawyer assured me Sebastian would provide for my family regardless. But my conscience wouldn't let me be the reason someone lost everything they'd been raised to inherit. So I said yes. Now let me take you to that altar. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is the channel for the quiet ones who finally get heard. If you've ever been treated like a transaction instead of a person, stay with me. Drop a comment and hit subscribe. Because what happened next will make you want to throw something at your screen. The altar. The chapel at Blackwell Manor was small. Private. The way you hold a wedding you don't want anyone to witness. I wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper, had hastily altered. It was beautiful in its simplicity, but I felt like a fraud wearing it. Like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Sebastian stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black suit. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. His green eyes were cold. Not just cold. Frozen. He did not look at me as I walked down the short aisle. He stared straight ahead. Like he was willing himself to be anywhere else. Anywhere but standing there with me. The priest spoke words about love and commitment. They rang hollow in the tense silence. Hollow and mocking. When it came time for our vows, Sebastian's voice was flat. Emotionless. He recited the words like a man reading terms and conditions. My voice trembled. But I spoke clearly. I would not let him see me shake. Then came the rings. Sebastian took my hand. His fingers were cold. He slid the gold band onto my finger. And then he leaned close to my ear. Close enough that his breath was warm on my skin. And he whispered 5 words I will never forget for as long as I live. Don't fool yourself. You're just a signed contract. The words hit me like a slap. My breath stopped. My throat closed. For one terrible second, I thought I might actually cry. Right there at the altar. In front of everyone. But I didn't. Because I have spent my whole life learning to survive things that should have broken me. Growing up in a bakery taught me that. Long hours. Difficult customers. Hands that blistered from kneading dough. A mother who died when I was 12 and left me to raise myself. I have been underestimated my entire life. And I was not about to prove Sebastian Blackwell right. I blinked the tears away. Lifted my chin. And slid the ring onto his finger with steady hands. He wanted me to break. I would not give him the satisfaction. The priest pronounced us husband and wife. Sebastian did not kiss me. He turned and walked down the aisle. Left me standing there like an afterthought. Like a receipt he'd forgotten to throw away. I followed him. Because what else was I supposed to do? The reception. The dining room at Blackwell Manor was enormous. A table long enough to seat 30. Crystal chandeliers. Silver candlesticks. The kind of room where every surface costs more than my father's entire bakery. Sebastian sat at the head of the table. He spoke only to Mr. Thompson about business. Didn't glance at me once. I sat beside him like a ghost at my own wedding. The food was exquisite. Prepared by a cook who had trained in Paris. It tasted like ash in my mouth. At the far end of the table sat Victoria Blackwell, Sebastian's mother. She was in a wheelchair, too ill to attend the ceremony in the chapel, but she had insisted on being present for the meal. Her blue eyes, so like her son's, studied me with an expression I couldn't read. Unlike Sebastian, she had not protested the marriage. Some whispered that she had known about the will's contents before Thomas died, that she had approved. After the meal, Sebastian stood without a word, walked out of the room, didn't look back. I remained seated, unsure what to do. Mrs. Peterson approached me gently, guided me upstairs, showed me to what would be my bedroom. It was beautiful. Tall windows overlooking snow-covered gardens. Antique furniture. Soft fabrics. But it was not the master bedroom. Sebastian had made that clear. This would be a marriage in name only. That first night, I sat on the edge of that bed and allowed myself to cry. I cried for the life I'd left behind. For my father, who had received the medical care he needed, but at such a cost. For the cruel words still echoing in my head. Just a signed contract. Is that all I would ever be? But as the tears dried, something hardened inside me. Emma Harding had never been one to surrender. If Sebastian Blackwell thought he could break my spirit with his coldness, he would discover he had underestimated me. I would fulfill my role with dignity and grace. Not for him. For myself. And for the memory of Thomas Blackwell, who had seen something worth protecting in my family years ago. The morning after. I rose early the next morning. Habit from years of bakery work. The sun wasn't even up yet. I dressed in one of my simple dresses, not the expensive clothes Sebastian's staff had filled my wardrobe with, and ventured downstairs. The manor was vast. Intimidating. A labyrinth of hallways and locked doors. But I refused to hide in my room. I found the kitchen. A warm, bustling space that felt more like home than any other room in that house. The cook was a kind woman named Beatrice. She had worked for Thomas Blackwell for 30 years. She looked surprised to see me, the new mistress of the manor, standing in her kitchen in a plain dress, asking if she needed help with breakfast. Beatrice welcomed me warmly. Unlike the rest of the staff, who had been instructed by Sebastian to treat me with distant courtesy, she seemed genuinely glad for the company. Over the next hour I learned 3 things. First, Beatrice remembered the night Thomas came home with stories of the baker and his daughter who had saved his life. She looked at me with something like gratitude, like I was a living reminder that her old master had been right about some things. Second, the manor was enormous. Dozens of rooms. Most of them rarely used. Sebastian spent his days either in his study or at his office in the city. Victoria remained in her rooms on the 2nd floor. The staff were efficient but distant. Third, Sebastian had not always been like this. Beatrice spoke carefully, but I could read between the lines. Before Thomas died, Sebastian had been different. Ambitious, yes. Sometimes arrogant. But not cruel. Thomas's passing had changed him. He had loved his father deeply, despite their differences. And the will's conditions felt like a betrayal from beyond the grave. Understanding this did not excuse Sebastian's behavior. But it gave me context. He was not just fighting me. He was fighting his own grief and rage. And that I could work with. The routine. Over the following weeks, I established a routine. I rose early, explored the manor and its grounds, found ways to make myself useful. I started visiting Victoria daily, reading to her when she was too tired to hold a book herself. She responded with warmth that her son lacked. Slowly, a genuine affection grew between us. She told me stories about Sebastian as a boy, before business and wealth had hardened him, when he had been passionate about music and art, when he had dreamed of being more than just his father's successor. He gave up everything he loved, Victoria told me one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. And then Thomas's will made him feel like even that sacrifice wasn't enough. I understood then the depth of Sebastian's pain. He wasn't just angry about being forced to marry me. He was mourning the loss of his father's faith in him, questioning whether he had wasted his life trying to earn approval that would never come. I also took interest in the manor's library, a vast room filled with thousands of books. I had always loved reading but rarely had time for it at the bakery. Now I devoured novels and histories, educating myself about the world I had been thrust into. Knowledge, I believed, would be my armor. Sebastian noticed my presence in his home, but he said nothing. He passed me in hallways without acknowledgement, ate meals in his study rather than the dining room, made it clear through his absence that I was unwelcome in his life. Yet sometimes I caught him watching me, from across a room, from the end of a hallway, his expression unreadable. What was he thinking? Did he resent me? Or was there something else beneath that cold exterior? I couldn't know that Sebastian was fighting his own internal battle. He had expected me to be grasping and ambitious, eager to claim my place as mistress of Blackwell Manor. Instead, I moved through his home like a quiet stream, gentle but persistent, wearing away at his assumptions. I did not demand anything, did not complain about my treatment, showed kindness to everyone I encountered, from Victoria to the lowest servant. It irritated him that he noticed these things. It irritated him more that he found himself looking for me in the rooms of the manor, his day feeling incomplete if he did not catch at least a glimpse of me. He told himself it was mere curiosity. How long would I maintain this act of martyred patience? But deep down, in a place he refused to examine too closely, Sebastian was beginning to suspect that I was no act at all. The dinner. 3 months passed. The Cold War between us settled into a predictable pattern. He ignored me. I maintained my dignity. We coexisted like two planets orbiting the same sun but never touching. Then everything changed. It was autumn, rain drumming against the windows. I was making my way down the grand staircase when I heard raised voices coming from Sebastian's study. The door was slightly ajar. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help hearing. Sebastian, came the smooth voice of Richard Stevens, a business associate I had met briefly at a dinner party weeks ago. The Singapore deal is too risky. Pull out now before you lose everything. I've analyzed every angle, Sebastian replied. His tone was sharp with frustration. The projections are solid. This expansion will secure our position in Asian markets for the next decade. Or it will bankrupt you, Richard countered. Your father would never have taken such a gamble. The mention of Thomas Blackwell hung in the air like smoke. I heard papers rustling. Then Sebastian's voice, colder now. My father isn't here to make these decisions. I am. And I've made my choice. Richard's footsteps approached the door. I quickly moved away, not wanting to be caught listening. As Richard emerged, he nearly collided with me. His eyes flickered with something calculating before he smiled politely. Mrs. Blackwell. Always a pleasure. I nodded but said nothing. There was something about Richard Stevens that made my skin crawl. I couldn't pinpoint why. He had always been courteous. But his courtesy felt like a mask, covering something darker. The warning. I found Victoria in the conservatory. She was wrapped in blankets despite the warmth of the room. Her health had been declining slowly. I had taken it upon myself to provide companionship during these difficult days. You heard them arguing, she said without preamble. Her voice was weak, but her mind remained sharp. I settled into the chair beside her. I didn't mean to. Richard Stevens is a snake, Victoria said bluntly. He's been trying to position himself as Sebastian's right hand since Thomas died. But he doesn't have my son's best interests at heart. He wants control of the company for himself. I absorbed this information quietly. I knew little about business, but I understood human nature well enough. Why doesn't Sebastian see it? Because he's blind with grief and anger. Victoria reached out and took my hand. Her grip was frail but warm. He sees you as a reminder of his father's lack of faith in him. It's not rational, but grief rarely is. My throat tightened. He despises me. Oh child. He fears you. Victoria's blue eyes met mine with startling clarity. You represent everything he's been taught to dismiss. Kindness without agenda. Strength without arrogance. Love without condition. You terrify him. Because you challenge everything he believes about how the world works. Before I could respond, Mrs. Peterson appeared at the door. Her expression was troubled. Mrs. Blackwell, Mr. Sebastian is asking for you in his study. My heart skipped. In 3 months, Sebastian had never requested my presence directly. I excused myself from Victoria and made my way to the study, my mind racing with possibilities. The request. Sebastian stood by the window, his back to the door. He didn't turn when I entered. Close the door, he said quietly. I did as instructed, then waited in silence. I need your help, Sebastian said finally. The words seemed to cost him physically. There's a dinner tomorrow night. Investors from Singapore. Traditional. Family-oriented. They'll expect to meet my wife. And you want me to play the role? I kept my voice neutral. Sebastian turned to face me. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. His usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. I want you to be present. To be yourself. They'll see through any performance. The admission surprised me. It was the closest Sebastian had come to acknowledging that I possessed any value beyond the contract that bound us. I'll do it, I said simply. Something flickered in his eyes. Relief perhaps. Or suspicion. There will be 7 courses. The Chens are particular about etiquette. Mrs. Peterson will help you prepare. I grew up in a bakery, Sebastian. Not a cave. I let a hint of steel creep into my voice. I know which fork to use. For the first time since our wedding, Sebastian's lips twitched with something that might have been amusement. The moment passed quickly. His expression hardened again. Wear something appropriate. Not those plain dresses you favor. The criticism stung. But I refused to show it. Is there anything else? Sebastian hesitated, as if wrestling with something internal. Just be ready at 7 o'clock. I left the study with my composure intact. But once in the hallway, I leaned against the wall and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow night would be a test. Not just of my social skills, but of my ability to stand beside Sebastian as an equal, even when he refused to see me as one. The transformation. The next day passed in a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Peterson, warming to me over the months, helped me select a dress from the wardrobe that Sebastian had ordered filled with clothes I had never worn. We chose deep emerald green. It complemented my dark hair, brought out the warmth in my brown eyes. Elegant without being ostentatious. As I studied myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman looking back. I had always been pretty in a simple way, but this dress transformed me into something else entirely. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine Sebastian seeing me this way, truly seeing me, and something in his cold expression softening. Then I pushed the thought away. Such fantasies were dangerous. The Chens. The dinner guests arrived precisely at 7 o'clock. Mr. and Mrs. Chun were in their 60s. Dignified. Gracious. Their son David accompanied them. A successful architect in his early 30s. They greeted Sebastian warmly, then turned to me with open curiosity. Mrs. Blackwell, Mrs. Chun said, taking my hands in hers. How wonderful to finally meet you. Sebastian has told us so much about you. I glanced at Sebastian. Surprised. He maintained his neutral expression, but I thought I detected a faint tension in his jaw. The dinner proceeded smoothly. I found myself genuinely enjoying the Chen's company. They were intelligent, well-traveled, possessed a warmth that reminded me of my own parents. Mrs. Chen asked about my background. Rather than hide my humble origins, I spoke honestly. About growing up in the bakery, learning to bake bread at my father's side, the satisfaction of creating something with my own hands. Sebastian watched me throughout the meal. Expression unreadable. I noticed him watching, but I focused on being present with our guests, answering questions, asking my own, facilitating conversation between Sebastian and Mr. Chun. Then, during the 5th course, the evening took an unexpected turn. David Chun, who had been quiet through most of the meal, suddenly addressed me directly. Mrs. Blackwell, I understand you've taken an interest in the Manor's gardens. My mother mentioned she saw you sketching the fountain last week. I blinked in surprise. I had indeed been drawing the fountain. An old habit from childhood when I couldn't afford paints and made do with pencil and paper. I hadn't realized anyone had noticed. Yes, I enjoy sketching. The gardens here are beautiful. David is quite the artist himself, Mrs. Chun interjected proudly. Perhaps you could show Emma some of your work. Before I could respond politely, Sebastian spoke. His voice cut through the pleasant atmosphere like a blade. I'm sure Emma has more important things to do than look at sketches. The table fell silent. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Not from embarrassment for myself. From anger. Sebastian had just been rude to our guests. Mrs. Chen's smile faltered. Mr. Chen's expression cooled. I made a split-second decision. I placed my hand over Sebastian's on the table. A gesture that appeared affectionate, but allowed me to squeeze his hand hard enough to make my point. What my husband means, I said smoothly, my smile never wavering, is that I would be delighted to see David's work. But perhaps after dinner, when we can give it proper attention. Sebastian tends to be protective of my time. Aren't you, darling? Sebastian stared at me, caught between irritation and something else. I held his gaze steadily, communicating silently that I would not let him sabotage this evening. Finally, he nodded slightly. Of course. I only want to ensure you're not overwhelmed. The tension eased. Conversation resumed. But I kept my hand on Sebastian's for another moment, feeling his pulse rapid under my fingers. Before I withdrew, the rest of the dinner passed without incident. The Chens departed with promises to finalize the Singapore deal the following week. Clearly impressed by both Sebastian's business acumen and, I suspected, by the partnership they believed existed between him and his wife. The confrontation. After the guests left, Sebastian poured himself a drink in the study. I appeared in the doorway, still wearing the emerald dress. You're welcome, I said quietly. Sebastian took a long sip before responding. I didn't ask for your intervention. No. You asked for my presence. I gave you more than that. I gave you credibility. I stepped into the room, my earlier restraint dissolving into honest frustration. Mrs. Chun told me during dinner that they almost canceled tonight. They'd heard rumors about our marriage, about how you treat me. They came to assess whether you were stable enough to trust with their investment. Sebastian's jaw clenched. And you convinced them that despite your arrogance, you have someone by your side who can balance you, someone who can smooth the edges you leave rough. I moved closer, my eyes flashing. You may see me as just a contract, Sebastian, but the rest of the world sees me as your wife. And whether you like it or not, that means my actions reflect on you just as yours reflect on me. I never asked you to care about my business, Sebastian said. But his voice lacked its usual conviction. You didn't have to ask. It's what partners do. I turned to leave, then paused. Your father didn't trap you in this marriage to punish you, Sebastian. He did it because he knew you needed someone who would stand beside you even when you pushed them away. Someone who would see the man you could be, not just the man you've become. I met his eyes one last time. I'm beginning to think he was right. I left before he could respond, my heart pounding. In my room, I removed the beautiful dress and hung it carefully in the wardrobe. My hands were shaking. Whether from anger or something else, I couldn't say. What I didn't know was that Sebastian stood in his study for a long time after I left, staring at the door I'd walked through, my words echoing in his mind. For the first time since his father's death, something cracked in the wall he'd built around his heart. And it terrified him. The shift. The following weeks brought subtle changes to Blackwell Manor. Sebastian didn't apologize for his behavior at the dinner, but his treatment of me shifted, almost imperceptibly. He began taking meals in the dining room again, rather than his study. He asked my opinion on minor household matters. Once, when I mentioned a book I was reading, he brought me another by the same author the next day, left it outside my door without comment. I noticed these small gestures, but I didn't acknowledge them directly. I continued my routines, caring for Victoria, managing the household staff, who had grown to respect me, reading in the library, sketching in the gardens. But I was aware always of Sebastian's presence. of his eyes following me when he thought I wasn't looking. Victoria's health continued to decline. The doctors could do little except make her comfortable. I spent hours each day at her bedside, reading aloud, talking about my childhood, listening to her stories about Sebastian as a boy. He used to play the piano, Victoria told me one afternoon. Beautifully. He gave it up when his father told him it was a waste of time. That's tragic, I said. Yes. Victoria's eyes were distant. He gave up everything he loved to become what was expected. And then Thomas's will made him feel like even that wasn't enough. That night, I found Sebastian in the music room, a space I had never seen him enter before. He sat at the grand piano, his fingers resting on the keys, not playing. I stood in the doorway, uncertain whether to intrude. My mother told you, Sebastian said without turning around. She loves you. I replied simply. She wants me to understand you. And do you understand me? Sebastian finally looked at me, his green eyes reflecting the lamplight. I considered the question carefully. I understand that you're hurt. I understand that I represent that hurt in a way that makes it impossible for you to see me clearly. But I also understand that you're more than your pain, Sebastian, whether you remember that or not. Sebastian's fingers pressed down on the keys, producing a single mournful note that hung in the air between us. I used to play. You could play again. What would be the point? His voice was hollow. I crossed the room and sat beside him on the piano bench, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. The point is that some parts of ourselves shouldn't be sacrificed, no matter what's expected. Some things we should hold on to because they make us who we are. Sebastian looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time since our wedding. In the soft light, my face held such earnest compassion that something inside him finally broke. I've been cruel to you, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed, not flinching from the truth. You didn't deserve it. No, I didn't. Sebastian's hand moved to cover mine on the piano bench. The touch was gentle, questioning. I don't know how to undo what I've done. You start by stopping, I said. You stop seeing me as the enemy. You stop punishing me for your father's choices. You stop hiding behind anger because it's easier than facing grief. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, a gesture so tender it made my breath catch. What if I don't know how to be anything else anymore? Then I'll remind you, I said softly. That's what partners do. That's what partners do, Sebastian repeated, like he was testing the words. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to my knuckles. It was the first time he had willingly touched me since our wedding, the first gesture of affection he had offered freely. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I held them back. We sat together in the music room as moonlight streamed through the windows, neither speaking, simply existing in shared space without warfare, without walls. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The crisis. Winter descended on Blackwell Manor with brutal efficiency, coating the grounds in snow and ice. Inside, however, something was thawing. The fragile peace that had begun in the music room grew slowly over the following months. Sebastian still maintained his emotional distance, but the cruelty had faded, replaced by something closer to careful respect. I had learned to read the subtle signs of his moods, when he needed space, when his silence was actually a request for company. We had developed an unspoken routine: breakfast together in the morning room, separate afternoons, dinner in the dining room, where we discussed everything from politics to literature. Never anything too personal, but no longer hostile. Victoria's condition had stabilized somewhat, though she remained weak. She watched the gradual shift between her son and me with quiet satisfaction, saying nothing, but missing nothing. One afternoon, as I read to her, Victoria interrupted suddenly. "He's falling in love with you," she said, her blue eyes bright despite her frailty. "He doesn't know it yet. But I do." My hand trembled slightly as I marked my place in the book. "Victoria, please don't." "Don't what?" "Tell you the truth." Victoria's laugh turned into a cough. I quickly helped her sip water. When she could speak again, she continued, "I've known my son for 35 years. I've seen him with countless women who wanted him for his money or status. He never looked at any of them the way he looks at you when you're not watching. He looks at me as an obligation. He's learning to tolerate me. He looks at you like a man who's discovered something precious, but doesn't trust himself to hold it without breaking it. Victoria squeezed my hand. Be patient with him, dear. The walls he's built took years to construct. They won't come down overnight. That conversation haunted me for days. I found myself watching Sebastian more carefully, looking for signs of what Victoria had described. Sometimes I thought I saw it. A softness in his expression when he thought I wasn't looking. A hesitation before he spoke, as if he were choosing words with unusual care. The way his hand would move toward mine across the dinner table before he caught himself and drew back. But I had learned not to trust hope. Hope was dangerous. It made you vulnerable. Vulnerability led to pain. I had survived these months by maintaining emotional distance, by not expecting anything from Sebastian beyond basic civility. To hope for more felt like stepping into quicksand. January. The crisis came in January. Swift and devastating. I was in the library when I heard the commotion. Raised voices. Hurried footsteps. Doors slamming. I rushed to the entrance hall. Found Sebastian standing amid scattered papers. His face ashen. Mr. Thompson spoke in urgent, hushed tones. What's happened? I asked. No one answered. Sebastian pushed past me without a word. Headed for his study. Mr. Thompson looked at me with something like pity, then gathered the papers and followed. Mrs. Peterson appeared at my elbow. It's bad, Mrs. Blackwell. Something about the Singapore deal. I heard Mr. Thompson mention fraud. My stomach dropped. I made my way to Sebastian's study. Didn't bother knocking before entering. Sebastian stood behind his desk, hands braced on the surface, staring at documents spread before him as if they were written in a foreign language. Mr. Thompson stood nearby, his usually composed face grave. What happened? I asked again, closing the door behind me. This time Sebastian answered, his voice hollow. Richard Stevens. He's been embezzling funds from the Singapore project for months. Millions of pounds. He structured it to look like I authorized the transfers. When the Chens discovered the missing money, they went to the authorities. There's going to be an investigation. My mind raced. But you didn't authorize it. There must be proof. The documents have my signature. Sebastian finally looked up at me. His eyes were devastated. Forged. Obviously. But proving that will take time we don't have. The Chens are furious. They've withdrawn from the deal entirely. Other investors are panicking. By tomorrow morning, I'll be facing criminal charges and financial ruin. Where is Stevens now? Gone, Mr. Thompson replied. Vanished with the money. We've contacted the authorities. But he had this planned for months. He could be anywhere by now. Sebastian sank into his chair, the weight of catastrophe bowing his shoulders. My father built this company over 40 years. I've destroyed it in less than one. I moved around the desk and knelt beside his chair, took his hands in mine. They were ice cold. You didn't destroy anything. Stevens did. And we're going to prove it. Sebastian looked at me as if I'd spoken nonsense. We, Emma? This isn't your fight. I'm your wife, I said firmly. That makes it my fight, whether you like it or not. A wife you never wanted, Sebastian replied bitterly. A contract you were forced into. You should leave now, before this scandal destroys you too. My grip tightened on his hands. I'm not leaving. Why? Sebastian's voice broke on the word. Why would you stay? I've given you nothing but contempt and coldness. I've treated you as an obligation. Something to be endured. You owe me nothing. I felt my own eyes fill with tears. But I didn't look away. Because despite everything, despite the contract and the cruelty and the loneliness, somewhere along the way, I started to care about you, Sebastian Blackwell. And I don't abandon people I care about when things get difficult. The confession hung in the air between us. Raw. Honest. Sebastian stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Truly seeing me. His hand came up to cup my cheek. His thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not. I agreed with a watery smile. But that's irrelevant right now. What matters is proving your innocence and stopping Stevens. The fight. Over the next 72 hours, I saw a side of Sebastian I had never witnessed. He was brilliant in crisis, methodical and focused despite the pressure. Together with Mr. Thompson, we worked around the clock, reconstructing financial records, identifying discrepancies, building a timeline of Stevens's deception. I refused to leave Sebastian's side. I brought him meals he barely touched, coffee he drank mechanically, and my steady presence that anchored him when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm. I also made calls, using the connections I had developed through my work with various charities Victoria had introduced me to. One of those connections led to a forensic accountant who specialized in fraud cases, a brilliant woman named Patricia Grant. She arrived at the manor within hours of my call, spent 2 days analyzing the documents, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Finally, she sat back with a satisfied expression. Mr. Stevens was clever, but not clever enough. Patricia pointed to her screen. These signatures are excellent forgeries, but the digital timestamps on the authorization documents don't match the dates they were supposedly signed. He used software to backdate them, but he didn't account for the metadata embedded in the electronic files. I can prove these documents were created months after Mr. Blackwell supposedly signed them. The relief in the room was palpable. Mr. Thompson immediately contacted the authorities with this new evidence. Within hours, the investigation's focus shifted from Sebastian to Stevens. An international warrant was issued for his arrest. But the damage to the company's reputation remained. Investors were still skittish, partners uncertain. The Chens, while apologetic once Sebastian's innocence was established, had already moved their business elsewhere. Blackwell Industries faced its most uncertain future in decades. The conservatory. That night, after Patricia and Mr. Thompson had left, I found Sebastian standing alone in the conservatory, staring out at the snow-covered gardens. I approached quietly and stood beside him, our shoulders touching. We survived, I said softly. For now. Sebastian's voice was weary. But the company is in shambles. Even if we avoid criminal charges, the financial damage is catastrophic. I may have to sell assets, downsize operations. Everything my father built could still be lost. Or, I said carefully, it could be rebuilt. Differently perhaps, but not necessarily worse. Sebastian turned to look at me, his expression weary but open in a way I had never seen. You amaze me, he said quietly. After everything I've put you through, you stand here talking about rebuilding. Most people would have abandoned me the moment the scandal broke. I'm not most people. No. Sebastian's hand found mine in the darkness. You're extraordinary. And I've been a fool not to see it sooner. He drew me closer, his free hand coming up to frame my face. Emma, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said months ago. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. What? That night at the altar, when I whispered those cruel words. I was trying to hurt you because I was hurting. I wanted you to be as miserable as I was. It's the worst thing I've ever done, and I've regretted it every day since. Sebastian's thumb traced my cheekbone. You are not a contract. You have never been just a contract. You are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. And I am desperately, hopelessly in love with you. My breath caught. Sebastian. I know I have no right to your love in return, he continued quickly, as if afraid I would stop him. I know I've forfeited any claim to your heart, but I need you to know that you've changed everything for me. You've reminded me what it means to be human, what it means to care about something beyond success and reputation. You've saved me in ways I didn't even know I needed saving. Tears streamed freely down my face now. You stupid, stubborn man, I whispered. I fell in love with you months ago. Despite everything. Despite the walls you built. Despite your determination to keep me at a distance. I saw glimpses of who you really were. And I couldn't help myself. Sebastian's expression transformed. Hope and wonder replacing the despair that had haunted his features for days. Say it again, he breathed. I love you. I said clearly. I love the man you are, and the man you're becoming. He kissed me then. It was nothing like I had imagined a first kiss with Sebastian would be. It wasn't careful or tentative. It was desperate and deep, filled with months of longing and regret and hope. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close as if he feared I might disappear. I melted into the embrace, my hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with equal fervor. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against mine. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for how I treated you, he vowed. Starting now. He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box I had never seen before. Inside was a ring, delicate and beautiful, a single perfect diamond surrounded by emeralds. This was my grandmother's, Sebastian explained. My father gave it to my mother when they got engaged. She wanted me to have it, to give to someone I truly loved. I'd like you to wear it. Not because a contract demands it, but because you choose to. Because I'm asking you, Emma Harding, to be my wife. Not on paper, but in truth. I looked at the ring, then at Sebastian's face, seeing vulnerability and love shining in his eyes. We're already married, I pointed out. But I was smiling through my tears. Then let me do it right this time, Sebastian said. Let me stand before everyone who matters and tell them that I choose you. That you're not an obligation. You're a gift. That I'm the luckiest man alive because you saw something in me worth loving, even when I couldn't see it myself. I held out my left hand. The plain gold band from our forced wedding still circled my finger. Sebastian carefully removed it, replaced it with his grandmother's ring. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for me. Yes, I whispered. Yes to everything. To rebuilding together. To facing whatever comes. To being partners in truth and not just on paper. Yes. We held each other in the conservatory as snow fell softly outside. Two people who had been forced together by circumstance, but who had found something far more valuable than obligation. We had found love. The second wedding. The following months were challenging. Rebuilding Blackwell Industries required difficult decisions and long hours. But Sebastian was no longer alone in facing these challenges. I became his true partner, offering insights from my unique perspective, supporting him through setbacks, celebrating victories alongside him. We organized a second wedding ceremony, small and intimate in the Manor's chapel. This time, Sebastian's vows were spoken with tears in his eyes, his voice strong and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish me for the rest of his days. My own vows were equally heartfelt, speaking of partnership, forgiveness, choosing love even when it's difficult. Victoria attended in her wheelchair, crying happy tears. Mrs. Peterson and the household staff, who had watched my quiet strength transform their home, witnessed the ceremony with genuine joy. When Sebastian kissed his bride this time, it was tender and public and filled with promise. The aftermath. In the months that followed, Stevens was eventually arrested in Monaco, brought back to face justice. The money was partially recovered, enough to stabilize the company's immediate future. The Chens, impressed by how Sebastian and I had handled the crisis together, reached out with a new proposal, a smaller but still significant partnership. Slowly, Blackwell Industries began to recover. Sebastian implemented changes his father would never have considered. Profit sharing with employees. Community investment programs that I championed. The company became more than just a business. It became a force for good in the community, reflecting the values that Sebastian and I now shared. One evening, nearly a year after that first kiss in the conservatory, Sebastian found me in the library, curled up in my favorite chair with a book. He settled beside me, pulled my feet into his lap. I was thinking, he said, absently massaging my feet, about that night, the wedding night. I set down my book, raised an eyebrow. Which one? The first one. When I said those terrible words, Sebastian's expression was serious. I want to erase them, replace them with something better. You don't need to, I said gently. That moment is part of our story. It shows how far we've come. Maybe. Sebastian conceded. But I still want to replace them. So here's what I should have said that night. He took my hand, his grip firm and warm. Emma Harding, you are not a contract. You are my salvation, my partner, my love. You are the woman who saw the best in me when I showed you my worst. You are everything I never knew I needed, and more than I ever deserved. And I will spend every day of my life grateful that fate brought you to me, even in the strangest of ways. My eyes misted. That's much better than the original version. I thought so too. Sebastian smiled. Then his expression grew more serious. I mean every word, Emma. You changed my life. You changed me. You changed each other, I corrected, leaning forward to kiss him softly. That's what love does. The transformation. As winter gave way to spring, Blackwell Manor bloomed with more than just flowers. It bloomed with laughter and music. Sebastian playing piano again while I sketched in the conservatory. Victoria strong enough to join us for dinner most nights. Staff who no longer walked on eggshells, but felt like part of a family. The manor that had once been a cold prison had transformed into a true home. And the marriage that had begun with a cruel whisper and a forced contract had become a love story for the ages. Proof that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. I often reflected on that journey. From the baker's daughter thrust into wealth and coldness, to the woman who had found her place and her love in the most unlikely circumstances. I had learned that dignity and kindness could be more powerful than wealth and status. That patience could melt even the coldest hearts. That love, when it finally came, was worth every moment of the wait. And Sebastian, who had once believed that marriage was simply another business transaction, had discovered that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or negotiated. They could only be earned. Through vulnerability, forgiveness, and the courage to let someone see you fully, flaws and all. On warm summer evenings, we would walk through the gardens together, hands intertwined, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence that only true partners can share. And if someone asked us about our unusual beginning, we would share a knowing look and smile. We started as a contract, Sebastian would say, but we became so much more. I would finish. And really, there was no better ending to our story than that simple truth. What had begun in bitterness and obligation had transformed into something precious and real. We had taken the broken pieces of a forced arrangement and built something beautiful from them. A marriage based on choice, respect, and genuine love. In the end, Thomas Blackwell's will had been cruel in its method, but wise in its intention. He had seen what his son could not. That Sebastian needed someone who would challenge him, support him, and love him. Not for his wealth or status, but for the man he could become. And in me he had found exactly that. The contract that had bound us was long since destroyed, torn to pieces in a moment of liberation and choice. But the bond we had forged in its place was far stronger than any legal document could ever be, built on a foundation of shared struggle, mutual respect, and a love that had been tested and proven true. And so, in the end, what began with the words, "You're just a signed contract," concluded with the far more powerful truth, "You are my everything." The journey from one to the other had been painful and difficult, but it had been worth every moment. Because the best love stories aren't the ones that start with ease and perfection. They're the ones that overcome obstacles, that transform pain into growth, that prove love can bloom even in the hardest soil. Sebastian and I were proof of that truth, a testament to the power of patience, forgiveness, and the courage to love even when it seems impossible. And in the years that followed, whenever we told our story, to friends, to family, and eventually to our own children, we never left out the difficult parts. Because those parts were what made our love real, what made it earned, what made it unbreakable. We had started as strangers bound by a contract. We had become partners, best friends, and soulmates. And that transformation, more than any business success or social achievement, was Sebastian's greatest accomplishment and my greatest victory. Together, we had turned a forced beginning into a chosen forever. And in doing so, we had proven that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones no one, not even the lovers themselves, saw coming. If you've ever felt like a transaction instead of a person, take this as your sign. Keep your dignity. Keep your kindness. and let the truth walk in on its own time. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.